66.
6640.
Your future lies in 6640.
66 books by 40 authors, and yet we now discover it's an integrated message system from outside our time domain.
Welcome to 6640, the ministry outreach of Koinonia House and Koinonia Institute. Today's Bible teacher is Chuck Missler, connecting the Bible to your life and the world around you. In today's study, Chuck continues his teaching on the book of Zephaniah, chapter 2.
Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, surely Moab shall be as Sodom, and the children of Ammon as Gomorrah. See, they're both used idiomatically, or as proverbs, if you will. Even the breeding of the nettles and the salt pits and the perpetual desolation, the residue of my people shall spoil them, and the remnant of my people shall possess them. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord of hosts. The implication here seems to be that hard words are spoken against Israel as the Lord's people are, in effect, spoken against the Lord himself. In other words, when you speak against Israel, you're speaking against God, his people. Therefore, as I live, see, as God feels that the things they've said against Israel, they have said against him personally. He's taking it personally. That's the very subtle but very profound point that goes through this whole passage here. So salt pits, of course, are found at the Dead Sea. Water overflows in the spring, and the salt is left by evaporation, of course. So these nations consistently opposed God's people. Moab, and there's a whole bunch of passages. We don't have to go through all that. And, of course, Ammon, again, all kinds of passages that consistently opposed God's people. Their land, which for centuries had been noted for its fertility, would become a desolate waste, and indeed it has been. There isn't a lot of tour groups going to see to those regions, particularly. The Hashemite kingdom of Jordan is one of the poorest countries in existence. And we visited Amman. It was marvelous, good service, nice hotels, yes, but as a country, they are in pretty serious shape. This shall they have for their pride, because they have reproached and magnified themselves against the people of the Lord of hosts. And when you magnify yourself against the people of the Lord of hosts, you're magnifying yourself against the Lord of hosts. That's the point he's making here. Pride against the Jew. And, of course, the plight of the Edomites. That was a separate study I encourage you to dig into. Not mentioned here specifically, but probably that group about which the Bible says more judgment than any other group, the Edomites. And understand where they really came from, more important, where they are today. Most people don't know where they are today. That's a study that you want to repair very, very carefully, because it's going to be very much continue to be in the headlines. The Lord will be terrible unto them, or awesome might be a better term than the King James uses here. For he will famish all the gods of the earth, and men shall worship him, every one from his place, even all the isles of the heathen. See, they're going to be judged for their pride and arrogance, from their gross immorality and idolatry, and their psychopathic inhumanity. Who does this describe? The enemies here. Who else does it describe? Do you see a mirror of the United States here? Our pride and arrogance, our gross immorality, our idolatry. Covetousness is a form of idolatry, Paul tells us. And psychopathic inhumanity. Astonishing. Astonishing. That is the danger. The dangers here in focus in Zephaniah are the dangers among believers, not non-believers, believers today. A pride of race, a pride of face, a pride of grace. And don't overlook that third one. Many churches are so comfortable with grace, they have their feet on the desk rather than bearing fruit for their king. They use the grace as a cover to shield them from the holiness of God. Be careful with that one. Paul said he had nothing to glory in. If he had none, then we certainly have none. What you need to seek is righteousness and meekness. And you're never finished doing that. Do you seek righteousness? Is that part of your priority in your life, moment by moment, day by day? Every morning when you get up, every night before you turn in, do you have a dialogue with your king? Do you seek righteousness? You know that's what he wants you to do. Meekness? Wow. Back to this verse, the Lord will be terrible unto them, for he will famish all the gods of the earth. What gods do you suppose he's talking about? Think Allah is among them? Fastest growing religion on the planet Earth is Islam. Is that going to get its day? You betcha. And worship everyone from his place, even all the isles of the heathen. Now, who would that possibly refer to? I don't know. Australia. I'm sure Australia and New Zealand might be exempted. No, I'm kidding, of course. I'm being facetious when I say that. Who might be included in these? Your choice. Well, now, ye Ethiopians also, ye should be slain by my sword. When it says Ethiopian here, the word is actually Cush in the Hebrew. It's north of the second cataract of the Nile. It would refer to northern Ethiopia and a good part of Sudan. Eastern Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, and so forth. The descendants of Cush, if you will, is the typical interpretation of it. That's why it's translated Ethiopians in your King James. And also, ye shall be slain by my sword, God says. Ooh. Ethiopia, by the way, had been a great nation. It was a very militaristic nation. It actually ran in Egypt for a while, from 720 through 654 BC. And at times it threatened the well-being of Judah, but it may be in quite a different mode today, by the way. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But she is to be ravaged by war, or the sword, if you will. And he will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, and will make Nineveh a desolation and dry like a wilderness. Stretch out his hand against the north. Okay. Destroy Assyria. That very well might include Damascus, as is recorded in Isaiah 17:1. This judgment, though, that's in view here with Zephaniah, is worldwide. So now he's focusing to the north. Assyria had been a major empire for many centuries. And Zephaniah's prophecies were in advance of the Medo-Babylonian attacks, because they're in the days of Josiah and so on. Nineveh, major capital of the Assyrian Empire. It's one of the oldest cities in the world. In Zephaniah's day, it was deemed impregnable. I'll show you why. We'll talk a little bit about Nineveh through here. Xenophon, the ancient Greek historian, reported that its walls stood 100 feet high. That's a tall wall, gang. And 50 feet thick. They were surrounded by a moat 150 feet wide and protected by 1,200 towers. Wow. Nineveh. Diodorus Siculus refers to a legend that stated that the city would not be taken until the river became its enemy. That's referred to in Nahum several times. History records that when the Medes and the Babylonians attacked Nineveh, there was a sudden rise in the level of the Tigris River. Water began to soften the sun-dried bricks. A section of the wall collapsed, causing a breach in the defenses. And the once proud city was soon overrun and destroyed. So it becomes a very interesting idiom here. Nineveh was destroyed by Cyaxares and Nabopolassar. Nabopolassar was the father of Nebuchadnezzar. He was the king when Nebuchadnezzar was the general and all of that. At 625 BC, within a couple of decades, Babylon rises to be the dominant factor in the region. The Scythian hordes, by an inroad into Media and thence southwest to Asia, thought by many to be the forces described by Zephaniah as the invaders of Judea rather than the Chaldeans, for a while interrupted Cyaxares' operations, but he finally succeeded. Much earlier, Arbaces and Belsus previously subverted the Assyrian Empire under another guy I can't pronounce properly, Sardanapalus, anyway, whatever. That's back in 877 BC. Most of us really pick up our biblical history from the Babylonian captivity on for about 700 BC on. But he continues here, and flocks shall lie down in the midst of her, all the beasts of the nations, both of the cormorant and the bittern, shall lodge in the upper lintels of it. Their voice shall sing in the windows. Desolation shall be on the thresholds, for he shall uncover the cedar work. So the building's going to be torn down, in other words. Now, you have some words here that cause a lot of translational problems. What is a cormorant? It's typically translated pelican, as it is in Psalm 102 and Isaiah 34. The bittern is sometimes translated a hedgehog or a porcupine. And none of these really quite fit the text, so there's a lot of discussion here. The first term is ka'ath, which is translated vulture in the RSV, cormorant in the King James, pelican in the Revised Version and the Jerusalem Bible, jackdaw in the Bible de Jerusalem and the New Jewish Version, screech owl in the New American Bible, and horned owl in the New English Bible, and the desert owl in the New International Version. But see, Cuth is found in the list of the unclean birds in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. It's also mentioned inhabiting the desert places. So it seems to make it very unlikely that a water bird like the cormorant or pelican is intended, or a scavenger like the vulture. We'll see. The second word that gives everybody so much trouble is translated hedgehog, bittern, heron, porcupine, desert owl, ruffed bustard, whatever that is, and screech owl or owl, again by these different versions. And so, what are we really talking about? Well, don't know. But it's used idiomatically anyway of screeching birds. It's amazing the time you can spend by people making guesses that haven't really looked at the total context. But basically all they're saying is that there's these screeching birds, owls probably, that are characterizing that was once the city. This is the rejoicing city that dwelt carelessly, that said in her heart, I am, and there is none beside me. How is she become a desolation, a place for beasts to lie down in? Every one that passeth by her shall hiss and wag his hand. It's interesting that when Alexander the Great marched his armies up the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, Nineveh had been so completely covered that they were unaware that beneath their feet lay the once mighty city, one of the mightiest cities on the planet Earth at that time, earlier. Nineveh. See, nothing seemed more improbable than the capital of so vast an empire, a city 60 miles in compass, with walls 100 feet high and so thick that 3 chariots could go abreast on them, with 1,200 towers, should be so totally destroyed that its site is with difficulty discovered. It wasn't discovered until the 19th century. In fact, there were books written that the Bible can't be true because it speaks of this fictitious city called Nineveh. But then in the 19th century, it was uncovered, and they were shocked to discover that it was well defined. Anyway, so it is like the prophet foretold. The picture of Nineveh's destruction is completed as the prophet reiterates that the city, though apparently quite secure, would be shamed. Its king was arrogant because of its supposed impregnability. And Isaiah talks about that too. It was known as the carefree city, as its populace felt that it lived in complete safety. And of course, quite large, as I say, having a circumference of 60 miles, a population at least of 120,000, which is a big city. Even today, it's not bad. In addition to an extensive outer wall, there was an inner wall with an 8-mile circumference, 50 feet thick, 100 feet high. Between the two walls was enough farmland to support the huge population. Nineveh's claim, there is none besides me, that the prophet quotes, was no idle boast. For approximately 200 years, she was superior in strength to any other city of her time. Attack on the outer wall begun in 614 BC by the Medes and Babylonians, and a combination of trickery by the attackers, carelessness by the attacked, and a natural disaster finally brought victory to the attackers. And the book of Nahum deals with this, the greater inner wall collapsed because of an unexpected deluge that swelled the river in the normally dry season of the year and inundated the wall. So it was very unexpectedly defeated, yet predicted by the prophet. The carefree boasting of the city was hushed by her enemies, and all who later saw its ruins scoffed at her former haughtiness indeed. To scoff and shake their fists at sign of contempt, God reduced the city miraculously and gave it to the wild beasts. They shake their fists at signs of contempt. That's exactly what the occupant of the White House is doing to God today as he intends to abuse the people of Israel. Interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what comes. The precision of these prophecies are a startling preview of the overthrow of the world's nation in the end times. God has judged the nations in the past, and he will judge them in the future. America, too, I believe, is ripe. Watch for it. Film at 11, right? Let's move on to chapter 3 of Zephaniah, the last chapter. It's going to, first 5 verses are going to talk again about the sins of Jerusalem. The next couple of verses, the failure to learn from the example of the fate of other cities. In other words, these other disasters were intended to give Jerusalem a lesson that they should learn from. And it's also going to deal with the universal day of judgment at the end. And it's going to talk about the renewal of the Gentile nations after that judgment, the big judgment. And it'll talk about the Israeli survivors. So that's the first 13 verses of chapter 3. So the prophet continues, woe to her that is filthy and polluted, to the oppressing city. You can't tell yet, but you'll tell by verse 4 and verse 14 that what's in view here is clearly Jerusalem. You can't tell just from the verse, but the context becomes very clear. Woe unto her that is filthy, polluted, to the oppressing city. Why? How are they filthy? They had the temple, and privilege creates responsibility. Has the Holy Spirit been given to the church? Absolutely. Does that increase its responsibility? Absolutely. So where does that put us? We're even more guilty than they are in some respects. Paul's verdict in Romans 3, verse 16, destruction and misery are in their ways. Pollution is on the inside. Pornography is the garbage of the ungodly. Obscenity and violence are the garbage of the world's entertainment. Have you noticed? Immorality arises whenever people are treated like things, and things are valued as if they were people. Pick up on the inversions. I think that's interesting. Very interesting. Continuing verse 2. She obeyed not the voice. She received not correction. She trusted not in the Lord. She drew not near to her God. Boy, do we obey the voice? Have we received our discipline or correction? Are we trusting the Lord? Are we drawing near? Yes, these are directed to Jerusalem, but I suspect they're applicable to ourselves. God sent judgment to them. 185,000 Assyrians were outside their wall. That scared the daylights out of them. But God, of course, delivered them, as you know, from 2 Kings 18. But that shook them up. God relieved them then, but they received not the correction. In other words, they're surrounded by 185,000 Syrians, and they're panicked. And one night after dinner, an angel slaughters 185,000 Syrians. And they didn't ever come back against Judah again. They had previously succeeded against the northern kingdom. And indeed they did. But they came against Judah, the southern kingdom, I should say. God protected them. Did they learn anything from that? His point here, God relieved them, but they received not correction. They didn't correct their behavior. They didn't link the threat with their behavior. Do we link the troubles in America to our behavior? Well, there are tornadoes and floods and this and that and the other thing. Really? You know what insurance contracts call those? There's a term in law. It's called an acts of God. It has a legal definition. But they really are. Anyway. She obeyed not the voice, she received not the correction, she trusted not in the Lord, she drew not to her God. So how about America, is the question. Riots, fires, floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, yet we continue in our ignorance and our debts. We keep borrowing. The problem is we have too much debt, and we're responding by more debt. Well, I usually like to say the first law of holes is to stop digging. Denying the God of our heritage and flaunting our sin. That echoes Isaiah chapter 5, the 6 woes of Isaiah 5. Flaunting our sin. It speaks that they dragged their sin through the town on a cart, by a cart rope. That sound like the gay pride? Anyway, let's move on. Her princes within her are roaring lions. Her judges are evening wolves. They gnaw not the bones till the morrow. In other words, there's corruption among both the princes and the judges, insatiable greed, devouring all ravenous appetites, leaving nothing till the morning. In other words, the unbridled greed is the imagery here. That sound familiar? That's Wall Street. And that's not only Washington, it's Wall Street, both of them are corrupt beyond imagining. I spent 30 years in the corporate boardroom, but that was over 20 years ago. And I can't imagine the corruption that has taken place in what at once was an ethical environment. Her prophets are light and treacherous persons. Her priests have polluted the sanctuary. They have done violence to the law. Wow. By their lives they brought disrespect upon the temple, the sanctuary of God. That's the situation there. You do violence to the law when it's not interpreted accurately or even left untaught. These that he's alluding to were the theological liberals of their day. How many pastors do you know that really know the Word of God? The biblical illiteracy in the pulpits is one of our problems. How many resort to psychology rather than the sufficiency of Christ? Boy, you could write volumes on that one. People have. The just Lord is in the midst thereof. He will not do iniquity. Every morning doth he bring his judgment to light. He faileth not, but the unjust knoweth no shame. The lack of shame. Wow. Whatever happened to shame? There's always been immorality, but it had the sensitivity to remain hidden, not publicly condoned. There was a day there was divorce, but it was something you tried to avoid or kept quiet. Now it's masqueraded on the front pages of magazines like a fashion statement. Broad-mindedness is a synonym for condoning sin. It was the social acceptance of homosexuality that brought down Sodom and Gomorrah. It wasn't homosexuality, it was the social condoning of it. Those were the town council that were hammering on Lot's door that night. Well, the coming climax, in verses 6 to 8, present the picture of the great tribulation, the great day of the Lord, Armageddon, and so forth. The day of the Lord is used by Zephaniah to refer to the judgments that were coming upon the people of Israel then, but he's also using the term in an eschatological sense, as most of the writers in the Old Testament do. He continues here in verse 6, I have cut off the nations, their towers are desolate, I have made their streets waste, that none passes by, their cities are destroyed, so that there is no man, that there is none inhabitant. You know, it's interesting, when you study the glory that was Rome, it's easy to see why they were confident they would live forever. You remember way back, even when I was a teenager, there was a movie called Quo Vadis, and one of the early Hollywood spectacles to try to get across the Roman Empire. There's one scene there, one the player says to another, all they knew, a lot of uncertainties, but they knew that Rome would live forever. And you could understand from their point of view how they would be convinced of that. And yet we smile at that today. Now when you go there and you view the ancient ruins and the stones worn by chariot wheels, you could do that today. It's hard to imagine that it was one of the great cities of yesterday. What about New York? What about Los Angeles? We can't visualize them gone, can we? And yet they will be. Zephaniah says, I said, surely thou wilt fear me. Or God speaking through Zephaniah. I said, surely thou wilt fear me, thou wilt receive instruction. So their dwelling should not be cut off, howsoever I punish them. But they arose early and corrupted all their doings. In other words, no learning took place. Learning is the modification of behavior. No learning is taking place. The warnings of judgment seem to have little effect. And I love this observation. If lavish spending and increased taxes could save an empire, Rome would still be ruling the world today. That's what brought it down. Lavish spending and increased taxes finally caused it to collapse. And that's exactly where we are. We've got debts that can mathematically never be repaid. And we're not stopping, we're not correcting, we're making it worse, digging it deeper and deeper every day that goes by. The agenda is, of course, to destroy the country. You need to understand that. Until you understand that, it all seems insane. Once you see that, you see how diabolical it really is. They have an agenda, and the agenda has been published. Continuing, therefore wait ye upon me, saith the Lord, until the day that I rise up to the prey. For my determination is to gather the nations, that I may assemble the kingdoms, to pour upon them mine indignation, even all my fierce anger. Ooh, coming from God, that's a terrifying phrase. Even all my fierce anger. For all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. Wow. Well, that's not in the New Testament. You got to be kidding. It is too, but anyway, move on. All the earth. The planet Earth is moving towards a definite appointment with a jealous God. Let's understand that. Psalm 2 lays it out, where the Trinity discuss this among themselves. Revelation 16 talks about the bowls being poured out. It's coming. See, the first part of this chapter is almost frightening to read. Dark forebodings and ominous rumblings. Now, at this point, we're going to turn from darkness to the brightness of blessings. Just the nick of time, right? Verse 9, for then will I turn to the people a pure language, that they may call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent. Then, you see there's a turning point here in the text. It's a milestone. And for then, I will turn to the people a pure language. Now the word then is the major pivot in the message. both tone and content. You'll notice it both places. He shifts from the predictions of destruction to prophecies of blessing and peace. Now, this term pure language is widely mistaught, and I'm guilty of the same thing, by the way. The language that is pure, free of blasphemies and so forth, is what it's really talking about. But there are many people that have suspected, and I picked up on that years ago, that it speaks of pure Hebrew. And the reason that caught my attention, because that's true today. If you visit, in a few days we're going to be on Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem, and you can go to a store and pick up a menu in Hebrew, and if Zephaniah was there, he would be able to read it. There are a few words in there that are modern that he might stumble over, but the point is through the efforts of Ben Yehuda and others, the ancient Hebrew has been reemerged as the language in Israel. And many people feel that was predicted here. I did too. But I'd be less than honest with you if I left it there. Other people think this refers to a kingdom age language. And there's lots of other allusions to that kind of a concept, that in the kingdom there's going to be a universal language of some kind. That is, the confusion of the Babel will be undone, apparently. And that's probably very legitimate.
You've been listening to 6640, the ministry outreach of Koinonia House and Koinonia Institute. Today's Bible teacher was Chuck Missler, teaching through the book of Zephaniah. Download the new K-House TV app to access an ever-growing collection of free resources. Visit the Apple or Android App Store, or search K-House TV on your Roku or Fire TV streaming device. Thank you for listening to 6640 and for your continued prayerful support of this ministry. Until next time, as we continue this series, may God bless you with the knowledge of His Son, Jesus Christ, as you study His Word.